Hello, everyone. Welcome to Laser Focus. This is the deep dive pop culture podcast from Nerdist. My name's Kyle Anderson. Thank you for listening. This week, in honor of another thing turning 40, this is going to be a big theme for this year because I'm turning 40, and I want everyone to know it. No, but another big movie turning 40 this year is This Is Spinal Tap, directed by Rob Reiner, and of course starring Christopher Guest, who would go on to do more of those type of movies, but was really like one of the first mockumentary, like out and out comedy mockumentaries that I think existed, where people were playing characters very broadly, but it's supposed to be realistic and stuff like that. Also, super great soundtrack. Like you could just listen to the songs, and they're almost good enough to just be songs. Like they're just slightly silly. But anyway, so that got us thinking, me and my guest this week, my guest and I, about what are the best comedy movies of all time and whether or not This Is Spinal Tap is it. And so we're going to leave, basically, This Is Spinal Tap is going to be our jumping off point. I think we both agree that it's great, and I've watched it many, many times. It's insanely quotable, which I think is a something that's going to be consistent with a lot of the picks that we're going to talk about. So basically what we're doing is I'm joined once again by friend of the show, past and future guest, Michael Walsh. Hi, Mike.
Thank you for having me. I love to be here.
Of course, anytime. Thank you for doing this. So much like we did with some of our other shows where we each have a list of favorites, we just kind of go through them. This one is going to be some of our favorite, we picked 10 favorite comedy movies, ones that we think could be on the list of the best ever kind of thing. Now, before we get into our lists, I do think it's interesting to point out we both approached our lists completely differently. I went very subjective. It was basically like, what movies make me laugh the most and the most consistently and are also good movies? Because there are some stupid movies I laugh at for whether they're trying. I mean, like, for example, this one's not on my list. Dirty Work makes me laugh, but I don't think it's a good movie. Do you understand?
I think Dirty Work is a good movie, and it makes me laugh very hard.
Yeah. So, but anyway, like there needs to be some decorum. It's not the right word. Some quorum on like quality, I suppose. But anyway, all of that is to say, I was very subjective, and Mikey tried to be much more objective.
Yeah, I tried. I think all of the movies on my list are legitimately like hilarious, absolute classics. But I did go into this trying to think about what there's as you said, there's art is subjective, and I don't think out of all the genres there's anything that's more subjective than comedy.
For sure.
Like just what makes you laugh is what makes you laugh, and it doesn't have to make sense to anybody else. But I did try to shape my list around what I think is kind of a consensus. Which is why I don't have some of my own personal favorites on here. I have movies that are in my personal top 10 of any movies, not just comedies, that I didn't put in my top 10 comedies list.
Interesting.
Yeah. So for example, Shaun of the Dead is one of my top 10 favorite movies, but it did not make my list.
Interesting.
And I think Pop Star Never Stop Popping is like one of the funniest movies I've ever seen, but I don't have it here.
Not to call you out, but it's Pop Star Never Stop Never Stopping.
Oh, sorry. Never Stop Never Stopping. Yes. There's just a lot of my favorite movies ever that I just didn't put on because I think that they are worthy of inclusion, but maybe don't have that sort of consensus around them.
Yeah. For my list, I kind of did a lot of what movies make me laugh, but also like what are representative of different kind of subsets of comedy movies. And so there are other ones within those subsets. I mean, when you start digging into like best comedies, like just looking at a list of like best comedies, they're so varied. And then there's like rom-coms. I wouldn't put all that many rom-coms in like funniest movie list, because a lot of them are just, they're funny, but the romance kind of is more the focus. Something like When Harry Met Sally is funny, but I think it's much more romantic than funny. I wanted to do ones that are just broadly silly because that's my kind of humor, and also kind of fit into little different categories. So we are just going to go through our list sort of randomly. Mikey put his into sort of like a tiered list, and so I'll kind of follow your lead a little bit when it comes to that kind of stuff. So
Just so everyone knows, I know Kyle's list. He does not know mine.
yes,
And
that's a good point.
because I know his, I was able to remove any doubles and add a couple more so we can talk about them. But I will say, before anybody starts getting mad,
But we know that triples is best.
triples is best. I have movies not on my list that I think might be better movies, but not necessarily better comedies. Does that make sense? So for example, I'll use this one. Ghostbusters is not on my list.
Yeah, because
Even though I think it is, it's a comedy,
It is,
and
yeah.
there are a lot of parts that are very, very funny and remain funny to this day. But in terms of comedy, I'm thinking like, what are the movies that just make me laugh the most, or make people
Yes.
in general laugh the most? So maybe Ghostbusters is better than 5 of the movies on my list objectively as a movie. And even though it's technically a comedy, I don't think it's a better comedy. That might not make sense to people out there, but that's how I approached it. I put so much thought into this, and
as per,
just so everyone
by
could
the
get
way.
mad at me anyway.
That is Mikey's MO when it comes to everything. We'll be like, hey, Mikey, write this thing up. It should only take you 5 minutes. And then like 4 hours later, you're like, okay, I think I got my head around it. You Overthinker Jones is what we call you. We've never called you that, by the way.
Oh, yeah. By the way, if anybody's out there, I have no idea what I have no plans for retirement. I don't know what it means to prepare for retirement. But if you ask me about, the friendship dynamics in Bridesmaids, I'm going to come back with many, many thoughts.
Great. Well, that's what we all should strive for. I don't know what that means. Let's live for today, as the Grassroots once said. That's a band. Anyway, okay, Mikey, go.
Okay, I kind of have these in 2 tiers, the 5 and 5. So these are not necessarily in any particular order. I will say this: I tend to give more credit to films that have stood the test of time.
Yeah.
The things that are truly funny are always funny. They're not necessarily of their time period only. Things fade. Things have to be funny on repeated watches to truly be funny. And there's one here that I don't think a lot of people put in their top 10, but if you kind of break it down, there's an excellent argument for it. Clue. Clue is just funny every single time you see it. It's a fantastic premise. Knowing the surprises does not make it less funny. For example, I almost put The Hangover over on here as like a modern day classic, but I do think that when you know a lot of the shocking moments, it decreases the comedy like by 2%.
Right.
It's just not to say The Hangover is not funny. I almost put it on here, but Clue is one of those movies where the better you know it, the funnier it gets. And I just don't think there's a single. It's basically a perfect film with an incredibly creative ending that makes everything that came before it so much funnier.
Can I tell you something? I have seen the movie Clue a total of 1 time.
That's not enough times.
It was a couple of years ago when, during lockdown, when we Nerdist was doing those kind of like watch along things, trying to get anybody to trying to get people to have at least a little bit of fun. And Clue was one of those movies that we tweeted along to, and I had never seen it before, and I thought it was good. I don't know how much I actually laughed, because a lot of those things just became part of the zeitgeist. Like, I think that's also something that's going to happen with a lot of our choices, is that like moments stand the test of time because they are quoted ad nauseum, and people go, "What's that from?" And then they go and find them. So like, the great Madeline Kahn saying "Flames on the Side of My Head," like that's always great. And like, weirdly enough, because Clue, they used to play Clue on Comedy Central once a day, maybe.
That's right. As someone who grew up watching Comedy Central every day of his life, yes, it was basically on every day.
But so often there would be something I wanted to watch, at on top of the hour, and so I would catch the last like couple minutes of Clue, and so I would always see Michael McKean going, "Now I'm going to go home and have sex with my wife," and that was, so I saw that moment so many times, and I was like, "What is this movie?" Based on the board game.
It shouldn't work. Right? It shouldn't work, and it just does. It's incredible that
everyone in it is just absolute, like just there is no bad performance in the entire film. Everyone is giving their complete, like, I think Tim Curry steals that movie. Truly a wonderful performance by a great actor. But like everybody's fine. Like people you wouldn't necessarily think are funny. Like I've never really thought that Leslie Ann Warren was particularly funny, but she's really funny in that movie. Yeah, good stuff. Really solid choice. And so let me go with one of mine that I think is similarly oft quoted and even has some of the same, I guess the same vibe, let's say, which is Mel Brooks' Young Frankenstein, which is turning 50 this year. We'll have not spoilers, tease. That's what those are called.
It's tease. Old school.
For a future podcast. Mikey and I are going to do a podcast sometime down the road, looking at all of Mel Brooks's films because there's actually not that many. But arguably, like his two best ones are turning 50 this year. The other one being Blazing Saddles. But I personally, I like Young Frankenstein more. I love the horror pastiche. I love how much he took the care to make it look like an old Universal horror movie, and then it's just silliness on top of silliness, and like, you know, put the candle back, like that is always good. Walk this way, and like just dumb. It's just dumb fun. Frau Blucher, and then there's always the horse neighing outside. Like it's just and then the very weird putting on the Ritz sequence with Peter Boyle as the creature. One of the best movies
pure
ever.
Comedy. That scene. Pure.
Also the great Gene Wilder, who you could do a whole list of just Gene Wilder movies, and it would, I think, like one of the best kind of understated performers who also went really big sometimes. If you watch The Producers, he goes really big.
Well, he does both in my favorite scene in this movie, which, and by the way, this movie was on my original list before I saw yours. This is one of the three, and I have it in my top tier. This is a top tier comedy for me. Although if somebody said they slightly prefer Blazing Saddles, I wouldn't fault them. I think there's a preference either. But I agree with you that this is the one that deserves the spot because there's more Gene Wilder, and he is one of my absolute favorites ever. And the scene where he does both the reserved and over the top is when he's telling Igor, "I will not get mad." It is, and then when he finds out what kind of they put the Abby normal brain in, and he just loses his mind, and starts to choke him. It's the best. It's you cannot be funnier than Gene Wilder is in that moment.
What is not Gene Wilder, but my favorite line in Blazing Saddles, which, and again, we'll talk about Blazing Saddles down the road, but Slim Pickens, who is underratedly funny, goes, "Somebody go back to town and get a shitload of dimes." One of the dirtiest, maybe the dirtiest of Mel Brooks' movies. None of his movies are particularly dirty, but Blazing Saddles sure is.
In the best way.
In the best way, yeah. But yeah. Okay, so two good ones to start with. I like it. Next one for you.
I don't know if this is the most recent movie I put in this list, but it's been around. I kind of have this idea that you have to have been around for 10 years to prove that you've, I know it's whatever, maybe it's 15, 20, but this is even longer anyway, it doesn't matter. I almost went with Anchorman, which I think I prefer more, but I'm looking more for consensus. I went with Step Brothers, a movie that is consistently funny from start to finish. And every time you watch it, it's still funny. It's really quotable. There are so many scenes that if you ask somebody their favorite scene, you ask 10 different people, you might get 10 different answers. I actually was surprised with myself that I went with Step Brothers over Anchorman, but I think that in the last 5 years, I think it being on TV just gave it more exposure and it's become more ubiquitous. So that's why it got the slight nod.
I forget to say this up top, and I've talked to Mikey about this. I have a really weird thing with comedy movies, especially more recent comedy movies, in that I just have no desire to see them. And Step Brothers is one I just weirdly have no desire to see. Um, I can't even explain why. Like there needs to be a gimmick or an in for me. It can't just be a comedy. For example, one of the hardest I've laughed at a recentish movie was when I went to I think I reviewed it even, but Game Night, which
Yes.
has kind of a thriller element to it. I laughed like a moron in that movie. I thought it was so funny and so weird. But just two people being annoying and dumb, like I just kind of can't with those. So I've never seen Step Brothers. I know it is beloved. But there's a lot of that ilk of comedy movies that I haven't seen. The ones that are like too heavily focused on improv and don't cut back or anything like that. Um, they're just like, give us 7 alts and we'll use 4 of them. That's like too many. You don't need to say the same joke over and over again.
Well, it's funny
Um,
because it just because you get two very funny people with a lot of chemistry together doesn't mean they'll necessarily find that right level. I don't
mhm.
really like Talladega Nights that much.
Yeah, I've
I
never seen
think
that one
see,
either.
I think that's a movie
It
that
is.
feels
Oh,
yep,
you had more
you're
to
not
say.
wrong, not wrong. I,
Yeah.
I think that's a movie that feels very much like it's just being made up on the spot.
Yeah.
And I don't get that. I never get that feeling with Step Brothers or Anchorman. They might be equally as improvised or not, but it's just how it comes across on screen. And Step
Mhm.
Brothers, I've never watched Step Brothers and not laughed. So
Mm. And I've never watched Step Brothers. So there we have that. Um, Back to my list. Let's see. So you mentioned it already, and I'll say it just because it's the most recent movie on my list. Although there are other ones that I could have put, but um, it is in my top 10 movies of all time. I actually think it may be not as funny as some other ones that the same team has made, but I do love it to pieces, and that is Shaun of the Dead.
yeah,
Horror comedy is a very tough thing to get right, and the thing that I love about Shaun of the Dead is that it is 100% a zombie movie and 100% a comedy. It is
yes,
both. It is both. It is not one does not get lessened because of the other. It's not a zombie movie that has some jokes and it's not a comedy movie that has some gore. It is literally both fully and completely, and I think that is the care. And I see the word parody and spoof thrown in a lot of times, and to that I say hogwash and phooey and pshaw, because that movie is not a parody of anything. It is just a comedy movie that is also a zombie movie. It has references to other zombie movies, but it's not a spoof. Like, learn what a parody is, folks. That's not what a parody is. You have to. It's not like those like Scary Movie or something like that. Those are parody movies. That is a specific parody of a trope of movies. Um, but no, not Shaun of the Dead. But anyway, to get to the actual comedy of it, that was my first introduction to Simon Pegg, and I think all of most people too. And his like what you were saying with two funny people with chemistry, him and Nick Frost together, and they were like old friends who lived together and all this stuff. They like know each other very well. They're so funny, bouncing off each other. Um, like, because we've all had that friend who we love and who is kind of the worst, and you're like, "Ugh," you kind of always have to apologize for them, but you're like, I love him, good guy. Um, yeah, it's great, and that is a movie I have watched hundreds of times, and my friend and I made a zombie movie because of that movie. Um, in college, like as a college, like, you know, enjoyment.
well, you don't have to convince me. This, like I said, this is one of
No, yeah,
my forget comedies. This is one of my 10 favorite movies ever.
it's wonderful.
Um, I imagine there are some people out there are right now saying Hot Fuzz is funnier. So I
Yeah,
want to address that because I have some thoughts.
I'm sure you do.
Yeah, what a surprise. I think that Hot Fuzz has bigger individual laughs,
Yeah.
but the funniest version of Hot Fuzz is the first time you see it.
Mm.
The payoff from the first hour, it's a slow build, and like Shaun of the Dead's much faster and gets
Oh,
into
yeah,
it, and it's
for
funny
sure.
right away. Whereas Hot Fuzz is a slow build to the big reveal of what's really going on, and it is so funny. It is so funny when you find out who is behind these murders
And
and
why?
why they're
Ugh.
doing them. And not that it's not funny when you rewatch it. I've watched Hot Fuzz many times. I
Yeah.
love the Cornetto trilogy. I love all three movies.
Mhm.
But I have never laughed at Hot Fuzz as hard as I did in the theater when I could not breathe. I was laughing so hard at the reveal. So because I put so much value on these movies holding up on rewatches and getting funnier with time, that's why I do think Shaun of the Dead is still the funnier comedy, just because it's humor. It doesn't rely on like the surprise quite as much.
Yeah. And there's something to be said too for like the heart that's in a lot of like, I don't love very like super cynical comedy. Like that's just a function of like where we are in the world. Like I just don't like cynicism really. I bounce off that way more than I used to. Like I am cynical about the world, but in my art I don't want that, basically is what it is. So I like that one is very like, even if you're like, oh, I know all the jokes by heart, I don't even really laugh at them anymore. You're still like caught up in the compelling like family or dynamics of these 6 people or whatever. The moment Shaun kind of realizes that Philip actually was his dad and he just was not good at it. Like he was just Shaun just wasn't having it. Like you just go, oh man, that's so sad. Like it's a really sad movie actually in a lot of ways. But it's yeah, it's great. There, go watch Shaun of the Dead, which is
Laser Focus and Nerdist approved.
Is it 20 years old? I think
It's so much older than you realize. Don't think about it too much.
It is. It turns 20 this year.
Yeah.
Heavens be. That
the guy from the Hunger Games?
Yeah. Yeah. Whatever that guy's first name was.
Plutarch.
Thanks very much. Okay, next. Go.
Wait. Okay, yeah. All right.
Remember how I just said?
Yeah.
No, it's
well, because Shaun of the Dead's one of my favorites. It just feels like my. I actually feel like somehow this is both considered one of the greatest comedies ever and is underrated. I don't know if that makes sense.
Sure.
But talk about a movie getting funnier every time you rewatch it. Animal House. It's a premise that can't be beat. It will always be a funny premise. It is stupid but smart. It is over the top, but it has quiet performances that are so good. It also has one of the funniest people to ever live at his absolute powers in a career that was way too short. Belushi is just it like the word powerhouse doesn't really even come close to explaining it. But it's not like he's the only funny person in the movie. All of those guys are funny. It's held up for a very good reason. And all of those. This is, I think, from the era when comedy really went from things are funny to things are legitimately like hilarious. Like there's just the era before that is just not as funny as what comes after National Lampoon got involved.
Yeah, National Lampoon's an interesting one because like when at first they were putting out movies, you had Animal House, you had like, the first Vacation movie, even Christmas Vacation, which I know a lot of people like. And they were like kind of edgy, kind of, whatever humor. And now they're like, when you see National Lampoon on something, it's just like, ugh, this is going to be stupid. I think maybe Van Wilder, which again was over 20 years ago, was maybe the last one that was in any way like culturally relevant. Now it's just like, I don't know. You see National Lampoon on a lot of direct to video movies. And I don't know how that happened, but yeah, I think Animal House is their best one by a lot. I think Vacation is funny, but I think Animal House is great.
You want to I don't think it's technically a National Lampoon movie, but I will say I have another movie that is basically one of those higher on my list.
Okay. Um,
Big time tease.
oh wow. My favorite is at the end of Animal House when you find out that Bluto became Senator John Blutarski. So dumb and funny. How many people did you know in college who had the black and white John Belushi poster?
Oh,
Where he's wearing the shirt or the sweater that just says college on it.
I don't know how many, but I can tell you this. That was my Halloween costume 1 year after college.
Nice.
There's a picture of me out there with I got it made, the blue college sweatshirt, chugging the bottle of Jack Daniels, which is just like in the movie, not actually Jack Daniels. That is an old urban legend. He was not actually chugging a bottle of Jack Daniels in that scene, and neither am I. I can try to dig out the photo for anybody who wants to see it. I am not actually chugging Jack Daniels.
I mean, good for John Belushi's like I don't know, infamy that people actually think he was doing that, because it's like, how many times do you think they did a take of that? Even if they did 2, that's way too much Jack
Yeah,
Daniels.
yeah. Just
he would have died much earlier if that were the case. Yeah, great choice. Love an Animal House. I'm gonna pick one that I'll get to the more esoteric ones later on, but I think this one is worth talking about in the same kind of breath because it's another 80s. It's my only 80s comedy on there. And like I can't remember if he wrote on Animal House, but he did write a number of National Lampoon things. This is a John Hughes movie, who, was very funny, and obviously did teen comedies. But I think the one I've seen the most by far, because it used to be on WGN as often as Clue was on Comedy Central, is Ferris Bueller's Day Off. This is maybe the most populist of my choices, and I don't mean to say that like super snootily, but I was looking through movies and I was like, okay, this one I think is funny, whatever. Like I was saying about what I think about comedies, but there's something about Ferris Bueller that has stood the test of time. It is universal because we've like, whether you are a kid in high school or were a kid in high school, like you can watch that movie and kind of get those, that feeling of like, I just want a day off, man. Like I want to go do whatever I want. Like, and nothing is, nothing he does backfires. Like everything works out for him. Like it's all just like, oh man, this would be great. And like hang out with your best bud and your girlfriend. And it's just like, this sounds so cool. And then like, I mean, obviously Cameron is the one with, played by Alan Ruck, is the one with the arc in that movie.
doesn't go great for him.
Doesn't go great.
Don't possibly think about what happens to Cameron when his dad gets home. Don't think about it. Don't do it. You're thinking about it right now. Don't think about what happened to Cameron when his dad came home. Don't think about what military school he was sent off to.
He was killed in Vietnam. I love the bit when he plays Norm Peterson. That's great. Alan Ruck is really funny in that movie. And finally got his due in Succession, by the way. Like he would pop up and stuff forever, and it was like, oh man, Alan Ruck, good stuff. And then like he's like, whatever happened to him? And then he was in Succession and got like Emmy nominated and stuff. Great, good for him. Matthew Broderick at the absolute Matthew Broderickiest he's ever been. A very like a very I had a crush on her, Mia Sara, because she was beautiful and fun, and just all that stuff. Like at the end, of course, you have Yellow's "Oh Yeah," it's the name of that song. It's so good. Yeah, it's a wonderful movie. I like all the weird stuff where he's trying to convince his parents that he's sick and like has that whole contraption. Like it's just so weird, and the weird bit in the middle where Jennifer Grey goes to jail and meets Charlie Sheen. It's so strange. One of the weirdest bits in the entire movie. Anyway, I love it. Ferris Bueller's Day Off. Do you enjoy that movie?
I enjoy that movie, but I don't know if it makes me laugh enough. Like, it's kind of one of those things where things are funny versus more than they're making me laugh. Like, sure. I think, oh, that's funny. And it's a very good movie. And it's funny that I'm the one who approached this trying to make it like a more objective list.
Mm-hmm.
and yet we can't help but have our
No, I
biases. Like
mean,
it,
comedy is subjective.
yeah,
That's the whole
like
point.
so
Art is
it's
subjective.
you know it just it's a, I don't fault you for putting it on your list, but it would not have been on
Oh,
mine.
thank
And
you. How magnanimous of you.
okay, never mind. I fault you. I fault
Thank
you.
you.
This
I
you're at fault.
Thank you.
Uh, it's funny. I have, and I'd like to go through a little bit after. I have such a long list of movies I considered, and as I told you right before we started, 2 hours from now, I'm going to be mad about ones. I forgot to put Dirty Work on it. I love Dirty Work. I've written about how much I love Dirty Work for Nerdist.
Oh yeah, you
Uh,
have. I forgot
and
about that.
I just kind of there's just too many movies, and I don't know. Maybe it's just me. And like I said, when I say I grew up watching Comedy Central every day, that's not an exaggeration. I might have mentioned this once before, but I used to come home. School got out at 2:15. I would be home at 2:30, so I could watch the original British Whose Line Is It Anyway at
Oh,
2:30.
for sure.
Like I didn't want to miss a second of it. I grew up watching every stand-up special, so I don't know if I've just seen so many comedies, but I have. It's like too hard to keep track of them. It's just too hard. Uh, but one I do not have trouble keeping track of is my next movie. And this is probably I would say, out of all of the movies on this list of mine, it's the one that probably most people haven't seen, even though it's still famous. But once I got 3 extra slots because of our double ups, I had to put it back on because I would put this up against anything in terms of laughs, like per scene, how many funny scenes, and just being like pure comedy, and that is Slapshot. Slapshot is super violent, it's super dumb, and super funny. Any movie that has 3 idiots and Coke bottle glasses skating around and attacking people with their sticks and their skates, you don't need to understand anything going on. You could watch Slapshot on mute and be
Mm.
laughing. And how many movies is that true of? So I make no apologies for putting Slapshot on. It is, if you've never seen it, there's definitely some stuff that might be like, oh, an age well. Well, nothing ages well, especially in comedy. But go watch Slapshot if you haven't seen it, and if you have, you probably have no issues with me putting it on the list.
This is one I have never seen, but I should check it out. So these Hanson Brothers, I guess, right? In the movie.
Yeah.
They never did anything else, right?
I believe so. 2 of them are actual brothers, and I believe they were minor league hockey players, which the movie wanted. The only thing I think they ever really did was slap some terrible sequel, but they've basically just made a career of going around the country, showing up as the Hanson brothers.
Wow, that's so weird. Yeah, it looks. Yeah, look at David and well, I guess they were Carlson, Jeff Carlson and Steve Carlson, and then David Hanson, and yet they were the Hanson brothers. That's interesting. 3 guys in Coke bottle glasses with similar hair. Yeah.
And by the
I
way,
need to watch it.
One of the best Paul Newman performances ever. Like, I'm not exaggerating, because I realize we're talking about like a truly legendary actor. He is so good in this movie, and he's so funny. It's really crass. Don't watch it. Don't watch it around kids.
Okay, I won't.
Don't watch it on an airplane either.
Oh, is it one of those where there's a lot of visual stuff you're not supposed to see?
I mean,
kids to see?
It's violent. It's straight up like just people bashing each other in the head. A lot of blood.
Cool. Well, you said that you could watch it silent. And so I'm actually gonna do 2 in a row. This still counts as my 10, but so you can do 2 in a row next time. But I put 2 silent movies on my list because I am a film dork. But I think any comedy list that does not put Buster Keaton on it is just forgetting that Buster Keaton existed. He was a human cartoon before there were cartoons that did that stuff. He was doing Looney Tunes style slapstick for real, a full decade or so before they made Looney Tunes. And so I'm putting Sherlock Jr. as like an encompassment of all Buster Keaton movies. I think The General is less funny, but it has better stunts. I think like The Navigator is super funny. There's a lot of his shorts that I think are just like out and out the funniest things I've ever seen. His deadpan expression, the fact that he would just do these, like, just take pratfalls that would have murdered anybody else, and yet he kept going. And it's a true bummer that he toward the end of his life, he was sort of penniless because he didn't retain any of the rights to his own films, which is a huge shame. Um, and he made a deal with MGM, which famously was a huge mistake on his part. Like, you got a lot of money from them, but like no control. They're just less funny. But all the ones he made for uh whatever that guy's name is, this kind of like lesser producer, were all super super funny. But Sherlock Jr. is a really nice one. I think it's only about 45 minutes long actually, but um he like goes into a movie screen. Like, there's visual bits that are really compelling and everything like that. So Sherlock Jr. as a representation of Buster Keaton. I also need to put as a representation of all Harold Lloyd movies. Like, Harold Lloyd is much less he's the third genius of silent comedy. Um uh and he did retain the rights to all of his movies, and so he was very well off. So he did great. um but Safety Last is the one that I'm going to put on my list. That's the one, you've seen the guy hanging off the clock. That's Harold Lloyd with the round glasses. That was the character of, he called it just the glasses character, but his characters' names were almost always Harold. And he plays just the aw shucks kind of guy who's trying to make it in the city, often like a yokel. I think he was from Kansas or somewhere in the Midwest in real life. And it was always just about him trying to, make it somewhere and in the big city and all this stuff. And that one, he works at a department store, and then decides to like it, maybe to save the store or like to get some publicity, decides to climb up the building. And they actually shot it downtown Los Angeles. And obviously there's a bit of trickery in there, but he was actually out there on the side of a building. Like, it's an amazing thing to watch. Also, if you look, after a certain point, there was a gag in one of his shorts, I believe, where there was a bomb that exploded at the wrong time, and so it took most of his hand off. And so if you look at, like, he got a prosthetic piece. So if you look really closely, especially on HD, you can see there's a little like line across the back of his palm, and like his fingers look a little different. It's because that's a glove. That's basically a prosthetic glove, because he blew off like 3 of his fingers on one of his hands because that's the commitment to the comedy.
Not the funniest tidbit on this podcast about comedies, but an interesting one nonetheless.
Yes. But I love Harold Lloyd. Just recently, I watched with some friends one of his few sound films, and it's a weird one. It's called Movie Crazy, and it's about a guy who wants to get into the movies, and there's, he basically meets an actress, falls in love with her in character, and then meets her outside of character, doesn't realize it's the same woman. It's an interesting one because it's basically a silent movie. Like, all the comedy bits have no dialogue. Like, it's not one of those ones where it's like, and now we introduce funny dialogue. It's just like normal scenes and then slapstick comedy. But the slapstick stuff made me just howl with laughter. So I love Harold Lloyd. I love silent comedies. I'm specifically not including Charlie Chaplin in this for 2 reasons. One, I don't necessarily guffaw at Charlie Chaplin movies. Also, he was a real creep. I think we all need to start recognizing what a creep he was. I don't want to get into it on this podcast, but look him up. Go to Wikipedia, type in Charlie Chaplin, and then go directly to controversies.
That's why I won't be including another director who's very famous for successful comedies.
Yes. Very similar problems.
When I was putting together my list, I know that I have this huge blind spot on the silent movie era. I I grew up with old sitcoms instead of old movies.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if we were doing best sitcoms, I'd be talking about The Honeymooners and stuff, like going all the way back to the beginning. But I knew you would have it, so I'm very, very glad to hear your takes on which of the silent movie eras deserve to be on this list, because that not coming from me, unfortunately. I feel like I know most of those from clips versus
Yeah.
actually having seen the movie, and that's probably what most people are like. But I think if nothing else, should be a reminder why we should all go back and see why these are literal legends who defined an entire generation of films.
Mm. Yeah, and I understand why people bounce off of silent movies, because they are hard to, like, you really have to get into the mindset of them. But I think the comedies, especially these broad kind of Buster Keaton or Harold Lloyd comedies, are much easier because they are silly and there's a gag a minute kind of thing. Most of them are also pretty short. I think Safety Last is maybe only like 70 minutes long. Like, they're all fairly short. Um, and there are also, like, especially with Buster Keaton, a lot of actual, like, 2 reel shorts, which were, between 10 and 20 minutes. Um, uh, I would check out the one called 1 Week, where he gets married and then he tries to build his own house using flat pack materials. And it goes wrong. It's one of the funniest. Definitely check out 1 Week for Buster Keaton shorts. I love Buster Keaton so much. Please watch Buster Keaton, folks out there. But I get it. Like, it's tough to watch kind of just like a silent drama, especially because at that point there weren't limits on time. Like, you can watch some of those. Like, I'm not gonna recommend a D.W. Griffith movie because that guy super sucked. But some of those are like 4 hours long. It's like, no, I'm not doing that. But silent horror movies and silent comedies, I think, are much easier to get a hold of because there's visual stuff to look at all times, that is compelling. So I'll send you a recommendation list of silent comedies if you want, Mikey. But
Well, too, Kyle, like they were never on TV. They were like, if you
yeah.
didn't specifically go out and seek them or have someone introduce you to them, you didn't come across them. There just wasn't that opportunity, and it's not like I'm old. I turned 40 last year. I still have cable because I like to flip around the channels, and I probably will be the last person getting cable for that reason. But you just don't come across silent movies, even with all these stations. They're very hard to find.
Well, I remember when I was, I would come home from school, and some of the syndicated channels, because we had 2 or 3 of those in Denver where I grew up, they would show old Our Gang shorts and old Three Stooges shorts. Our Gang was the, like, later, I think, name for the Little Rascals.
Mhm.
But they just bought a package of from whatever studio that was, and they would just show those in the afternoon. And so, like, I grew up like thinking like, oh, that's as old as comedy gets, are the Three Stooges. But, like, that was still sound era, and you had a whole ton of the stuff before that. But it is like, yeah. It's weird to be like, I watched a lot of Our Gang growing up.
I watched basically every Three Stooges short that ever made it to TV 100 times because I grew up in a house that loved it. And yeah, to me, that was like as old as comedy got. That, in my head, that and the Honeymooners were the 2 oldest things that was on TV to make you laugh. So I'm glad you brought up some legends, because my next 2 movies, I really wanted to make sure that some of the funniest people ever who made some of the funniest movies got on the list. And my next 2 movies do that, because I don't see how you can have a top 10 list and not have Jim Carrey on it.
Yeah,
and
great.
And the same thing with Steve Martin.
Leave him off. Yeah,
absolutely. And Steve Martin. So I have Dumb and Dumber and The Jerk. I can give you both of those as my 2.
I like it.
I chose Dumb and Dumber over Ace Ventura for lots of reasons, but the biggest is that I will always be more partial to a movie where 2 people are really funny versus 1. Ace Ventura is Carrey. Dumb and Dumber has him and Jeff Daniels, and they are both absolutely killing it the entire time.
Yeah.
That movie, the title and the premise really just lends credence that stupid is always going to be funny. It's always going to be funny. It does not require any context in a vacuum. It's just really funny to see a couple of dummies, lovable dummies, just going around. And that's also true of The Jerk, which is, just a lovable moron making his way through the world. The first time I saw The Jerk, the scene with the cans, I literally was like, is this the funniest thing I've ever seen in my life? Like when he screams, he hates those cans. I'm like, what is happening right now? And it's not like that's the only funny part. I I will entertain other movies for Jim Carrey. I'll entertain other movies for Steve Martin, but ultimately people are wrong. These are the two that deserve to be on the list.
Yeah, Ace Ventura, the first one especially, has really not aged well, like
Yeah.
super not, and in fact, it's like offensive, I think, at this point.
Yeah.
So that's a huge bummer, because that one I did watch a lot as a kid, because that came out when I was like 9, and my mom, for some reason, deemed, because there's some like heavy sexual stuff in there that
Yeah.
my mom was just kind of like, yeah, that's fine. I was also a huge fan of The Mask, which I also don't think has aged particularly well. Not necessarily for content, but for just like tone, I guess. Like, and
That one was, I thought, good, but that didn't land for me the way, like, I prefer The Cable Guy, which is also that same era, way more than The Mask. And that was a pretty divisive movie at the time, because it was more of a a dark comedy, and he had just done these big, broad movies.
Yeah.
And can I just say, if anybody who's like under 30, it's impossible to explain how big Jim Carrey was all of a sudden.
Yeah.
He just, he had been on In Living Color, which I love, so I knew him. I knew he was really funny, but he comes out with Ace Ventura and Dumb and Dumber and The Mask, all like back to back to back right away. And he felt like the biggest star that had ever existed. And it's funny that I put it with The Jerk, because that was Steve Martin before us. Like, Steve Martin was that guy for the generations before us, where, if you read his book about, stand-up career, he was so big that he basically couldn't hear himself doing comedy on stage. That's like the Beatles stopping touring because they couldn't hear themselves anymore. So these are two of the biggest comedians that have ever existed, and it sometimes feels like people forget that. But we're still too young to have been around for Steve Martin's, like, being at the absolute pinnacle. But we were the perfect age for Jim Carrey, and he just felt like the funniest person that ever existed.
Listen to this. Okay, so this is Jim Carrey's, just his 90s. Are you ready? And it starts in 94. In 94 alone, Ace Ventura, Pet Detective, The Mask, and Dumb and Dumber all come out. And 95, he has Batman Forever and Ace Ventura, When Nature Calls. 96, The Cable Guy. 97, Liar Liar. 98, The Truman Show. He's already kind of trying to branch out. 99, Man on the Moon. And then you get to 2000 with Me, Myself, and Irene. He goes back to the Farrelly Brothers. Bruce Almighty's 2003. And then after Eternal Sunshine, that's when he starts to kind of fall off a little bit, and he's not in as many like good movies or comedy movies. I think a lot of people like Yes Man. That was kind of later, mid 2000s.
I love Yes Man.
Okay.
I love that movie. It is so underrated. And I think there's this thing where Jim Carrey was so big that once he had a few movies that didn't land the way people expected, they were like, oh, I guess he's not funny anymore. And people have just missed a lot of really good performances from him.
Mm-hmm.
I will say this: The Truman Show's been on TV a lot lately, and every time it's on, I watch it and I think to myself, he's so good in this movie. I don't think we appreciated just like how good this performance is.
One of the last movies I saw to review before lockdown in 2020 was Sonic the Hedgehog, which I didn't like, but undeniably Jim Carrey is not only the best part of that movie, but like giving some of his funniest stuff I'd seen in years as Dr. Robotnik. Like, he's so funny and weird in that movie. So yeah, like, he's a strange person. He also has some issues. But I think, to your point, like, he was so big when we were kids, which is about 30 years ago at this point, when all three of those big movies came out. And then I've mentioned it before on the show, but I'm a huge, still to this day, Batman Forever fan. But that was like my first movie obsession when I was a kid. And like, I had a big Jim Carrey as the Riddler poster in my room. Jim Carrey was my favorite actor because of all those movies. And it's just like, he was hard to escape there for a few years. Which is wild. And like, I think a lot of Steve Martin movies, people don't talk about them as much anymore. The Jerk is a great one, but like LA Story is also super, that one's much more satirical and kind of more heady, which is kind of the comedy that he excels at anyway. But I love LA Story. That was another one that used to be on Comedy Central a lot. Comedy Central really was the gateway for, I think, a lot of people of our generation to get into older or kind of like 80s comedy movies. Cause like, and obviously, and I don't know, I won't mention it yet, but because I don't know if it's on your list, but there are certain movies that I was like, because it was so censored, I'm still laughing, but I'm like, I got to find the actual version of this movie because there's a lot of language that I'm not getting. But yeah, so that's great choices. I love those. My next choice, I'm going to go with, okay, so this is, now we're getting to like the heart of some of the ones that I just love, with all of my fiber and being. Uh, Monty Python and the Holy Grail. I love Monty Python. This was a thing. We got the tape of it, the VHS tape for my father for one of his birthdays. And because he would always talk about how much he liked Monty Python. And so I had never seen it before. This movie's turning 50. Man, this keeps happening.
Not so funny getting old.
It isn't.
The least funny thing about these comedies is how old they make me feel.
But you can maybe argue that Life of Brian is a better movie. You could
Which
also
I do.
maybe, yeah, I do think it is a better movie.
Not funnier, but better.
But I absolutely think there is no like my mom because we all watched it together, and my dad was like, it's a little risque, but I was like, I was probably in early high school or something like that, maybe somewhere around there. So I was like at the age when that, and I was like howling with laughter, and that was when my mom realized like, oh, Kyle has this type of sense of humor because it's like there's a very particular type of humor that Monty Python does, which is like very learned people doing the stupidest things possible using knowledge that they got in college. Like I love that kind of humor so much. The whole beginning with the credits with the weird Norwegian like subtitles at the bottom, and like it's one of the weirdest movies ever, and I love it to pieces. It also introduced me to just how strange, because that was the first Monty Python thing I'd ever seen, and like just how weird Terry Gilliam's drawings are. So anyway, I love Monty Python so much that I went from that to watch the Monty Python's Flying Circus, which is dear to my heart. I know all or most of those sketches, even though, cause like I'm watching them as a piece of like an artifact, cause they were on TV in the late 60s, early 70s. And, a lot of those don't work. A lot of those sketches just aren't funny. And yet I know them because they're part of a larger episode that had funnier stuff in it. So, in a way that we don't do with SNL or really anything anymore, where like people can just watch the funniest sketches on YouTube and never really watch what connected them. I think it's kind of important to watch the stuff that was like, somebody thought this was funny at some point. That's not the one that gets quoted.
It would be fascinating to just find out what everyone's introduction was to Monty Python, because I think mine was not knowing it was Monty Python. In fact, it wasn't until I sat down and actually watched the series years later that I realized. But I think the first sketch I ever saw was what is it called? I want to get The Most Awful Family in Britain, with someone on the couch screaming about beans, wanting more beans. And I just remember I just turned on the TV. I was a kid. I was like, what is happening? What is this right now? And then I didn't know, and I couldn't find it for years. And because I didn't know what I was watching. I didn't even put it together. But I mean, how's anybody going to argue with that being on your list? I don't know.
No one should. But yeah, Life of Brian, I do think is it's probably the best of their actual films.
Which is more coherent as a story.
Yeah, for sure. It's not just a string, because like Meaning of Life has a through line, but it's effectively just a sketch movie. Mm-hmm. And Holy Grail uses the quest narrative of Arthur and the knights to basically just do silly bits.
Yeah. Which, by the way, not complaining
at all. But like the actual compelling story of Brian Cohen from Nazareth is really good. Yeah. Anyway, Monty Python, love him.
My next film, I don't know if people think of this when you're asking the best comedies. I don't know if this would come to mind, even though it's definitely a comedy, and it's definitely one of the funniest movies I've ever seen. The Big Lebowski.
This was the one I was not gonna say, which is the
Okay.
one I was like, I must watch the actual version of this because they say the F word so frequently in that movie. And I needed to hear what it actually was. Yeah, I love that you put this on this list. I was hoping you would.
The first time you talk about that, the first time I ever watched it, it was years ago, with my wife. We weren't married at the
My
time.
wife.
We were much younger, so we were watching it at her house, and we loved it. And she said to me, she goes, "Yeah, my mom said, what movie you were watching last night? A lot of swearing." So I always think of that. I can't sometimes even believe how funny The Big Lebowski is,
Yeah.
because I feel like at this point I could write the script from memory. I've seen it so many
Mhm.
times. It's just it has so many great funny characters. There's probably an argument that it might have like the highest ratio of characters to funny like are 95% of the characters in this movie just funny unto themselves.
Yeah.
Like how many movies, like there's not a lot of people just walking around, like he talks about the car, right? He asked the cop, like, "Are you gonna like find him?" And the cop's like, "Yeah, we're gonna whole team search." It was like, just even that guy just shows up for 5 seconds and is cooking. The kid, when they accused the kid, right, of stealing, stealing the
Larry.
car, he just sits the way he's just sitting there. I, I could if we ever just if we're ever just at a loss for what to talk about some week, we just do an hour and a half on The Big Lebowski. Just go
Yeah.
right through it. I could do it.
So it wasn't until much later because I think I saw this I was in college the first time. This movie came out in '98, and I started college in 2002. So it wasn't that old, but it was on Comedy Central, and it hadn't quite yet had the cult of Lebowski attached to it, and neither you nor I are stoner people, and yet I think that it became a stoner comedy just by the fact that Jeff Lebowski is a stoner, the dude. Um, but what I find really interesting about it is that I didn't know until later when I was when I was actually a film, uh, when I had film classes to take, I guess. And I took a film noir class and we did like hard-boiled detective movies. And I was like, oh my God, The Big Lebowski is a detective. It is a out and out like Raymond Chandler story that just has this dumb world on it. And I was just like, that blew my mind. I think a really awesome double feature of like these offbeat detective stories would be The Big Lebowski. I mean, obviously all for adults, but The Big Lebowski and Who Framed Roger Rabbit would be really a great double feature as this like LA noir with a twist.
Kyle, I don't have Who Framed Roger Rabbit on my list, and now I thought it was going to take 2 hours after this podcast for me to be upset at myself, but I don't have Who Framed Roger Rabbit. You just ruined my
That's all
life.
right. I'm sorry.
I can't.
Mike, if I had $1 for every time you've told me I've ruined your life,
$17.
$17.
I have a Big Lebowski opinion that is going to sound like hyperbole, but I 100% believe it.
Okay.
John Goodman should have won the Academy Award for Best Supporting Actor.
He's
Obviously
really tremendous.
Obviously, he wasn't nominated. I'm looking it up. So that's the 71st. It looks like supporting role went to James Coburn for Affliction. Other nominees were Robert Duvall, Civil Action, Ed Harris, The Truman Show, Jeffrey Rush, Shakespeare in Love, and Billy Bob Thornton, A Simple Plan. Nope, not one of them. I mean, I have to go through everything, but John Goodman in that movie, what he does and the character he creates, I know I keep coming back to it, but I think it's that important when evaluating comedies. The more you watch it, the funnier it should get.
Yep.
The first time I saw The Big Lebowski, even though I really liked it, I didn't necessarily love Goodman in it. I don't think I totally got what he was doing. And the second time I was like, oh, I kind of get it now. And then the third time I was like, okay, this is amazing. And every time since I'm like, this might be my single favorite, like non-lead performance in a comedy ever.
Yeah.
Like he is incredible. And, like he has some deliveries in that movie that are so flawless and could not be improved upon by anybody. Like when he's like, just like quietly going, calmer than you are. Calmer than you.
Yeah.
Like I get you towed, dude. I can get you to 2 o'clock. There's everything he says in that movie, the way he yells at Donnie, the way he goes from pure rage to absolutely flat. It's incredible. It's one of the best. It's one of the best characters ever, any movie, not just comedy. It's one of the best performances. And, I don't even know if John Goodman's ever been nominated for an Oscar.
I don't know. I don't think
It's
so.
like, which is, you go back and you look at some of his performances. It's just incredible. It's like, really makes you wonder how something like that could happen. I think he should have won. Absolutely deserves. If you go back and you redo all the Oscars, I think he deserves it for Best Supporting Actor.
Yeah, it does not look. He is Emmy winning, but never got an Oscar nom, which I get. I mean, he was on TV for a long time, but yeah, he is so stinking funny in that. My roommate in college and I, who's still my best friend, would just like one of us would say something and the other one would go, "You're out of your element." We would say that so frequently, and it's like the more we thought about it, the sillier it became. Like, you're out of your element. Like, why is that your go-to for this guy who's just chiming in about something? I am
Say
the
what you will.
walrus. I am the walrus.
Say what you will about the tenets of National Socialism, but at least it's an ethos.
I love it. I quoted that last week to somebody. I forget why.
Some of the quotes from that movie, that from him specifically, that I say all the time, I don't think we want to repeat on this family-friendly podcast.
Again,
But
it's a very sweary movie. One of my another of my favorites is when the dude goes to see Maud, played by Julianne Moore, who's really funny in it, and David Thewlis is just sitting there, kind of like just giggling to himself half the way. and the dude's like reaction to it. So throughout the entire movie, they talk about how you're being very undude. The entire movie, he is at a level of consternation that is like unfathomable, like in most people. And I find that's truly what makes it so funny to me, is that like I love weird, like needless bickering that kind of just makes me laugh in movies. And that just the three of them, Bridges, Goodman, and Buscemi, just sitting there, just like all just screaming. I mean, not Steve Buscemi, obviously, but yeah, it is such a good movie. I think it's underrated in how overrated it is. Like, people have written it off because it's like, ugh, everyone talks about the Big Lebowski. There's a period of time when it was like hack to talk about the Big Lebowski.
we're this far into talking about it, and we didn't even mention Philip Seymour Hoffman.
Oh yeah,
Like, that's how good this movie. Like, that's her life is in your hand, dude. Her life is in, like, this is how funny and how good this movie is, and how just absolutely stacked it is with incredible performances that we just went through the whole thing, and even mentioned Philip Seymour Hoffman, who's killing it. Well, even though nothing written for him. If you just read the script, nothing written for him is necessarily that funny, and everything he says is the funniest thing you've ever heard.
Yeah, and it's just there's a thing in theater, not to get too heady or dumb, but like where like you can do stuff if you're just saying the same line over and over and over again, and like each time it gets different in a it's like, I think it might be a Meisner technique or something like that, I forget which, but like that kind of repetition of lines in that movie where everyone just says the same thing over and over and over again really quickly, it truly makes me laugh. And like the fact that they peed on your rug, they peed on my rug, they peed on your, really tied the room together. Like, they just say it so frequently, constantly weird and funny. Yeah, great choice. I'm very happy you picked that one. All right, next up, I am going to talk about it's tough. Like, what do I talk about next? I'm going to say another old movie, just because I was making my list and I was like, well, I got to throw these people in because I think it is. I think it is, again, it's underrated because it's older movies. I think people don't really talk about how funny and fast, and the timing especially was for the Marx Brothers. And so I've chosen, as a representative of all the best Marx Brothers, I've chosen Duck Soup. It's maybe the most famous of their ones.
Yeah, it's the most famous, but I think it's the most famous for a reason. I think it's funny, when I was putting my list together, I was so confident you would have Duck Soup on it that I didn't even worry about it.
Yeah. I Groucho Marx is perhaps like should be on the Mount Rushmore of like funny people. Just, he's so stinking funny in that. Harpo is funny in the weird, silent way. Chico never really did it for me that much, but he's doing a specific character. Like this again, these were
There's a
their
dynamic.
it's a
He's
dynamic,
given, yeah.
and their shtick was born out of vaudeville. So like they had, and actually kind of like, to get like very heady into theater, but like commedia dell'arte, where they're each kind of playing an archetype. And Groucho to me is just like, it can't just zinger after zinger after zinger, and just like nobody could deliver a line as funny as that. And yeah, it's almost hard for me to talk about Duck Soup just as well. And then there's this bit, because it's literally the whole movie, like from beginning to end. I think Duck Soup is you know oh, I fell asleep. No, but it's an hour and 9 minutes, and it's just joke, 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 joke. This is the one where Groucho plays Rufus T. Firefly. I think this was the last, or one of the last ones that had Zeppo in it. He clearly did not want to be in the group. It was their younger brother, who was not funny, nor was he ever the romantic lead. Like, that's who he ought to have been in the troupe, but like he just kind of was not. He was just there. He just ran around. So eventually he stopped being in it. But uh, they would always use Margaret Dumont, who is this very tall, very austere woman, as the kind of the butt of a lot of the jokes, especially because like Groucho is quite short, and so him standing next to Margaret Dumont is always really funny, and just kind of delivering, and like his weird, walks. He would like crouch down and do this very. I don't know how his knees survived, honestly, because like they must have, because he was wearing really baggy pants. They must have put like little pads behind his knees so that, like catchers have nowadays, so that they don't blow their knees out. Yeah. Anyway, Duck Soup. If you've never seen any of the Marx Brothers movies, that's the one I would. There's also like A Night at the Opera is also super good, but I would say Duck Soup.
I'm one of those people. I think that 30 Rock is probably pound for pound, laugh for laugh, the funniest sitcom ever. Just because it packs so many jokes into every, like, it's always jokes. It's always jokes. It's always bits. And I really feel like the Groucho and the Marx Brothers are the the ancestors of that concept. Yeah. Of just pure comedy. Keep going. It's all about the laughs. And that's what I've always, in terms of judging comedies, that's what I'm always looking for. I want to laugh. That's why I'm watching you. This is why I've complained about this over the last 10 years. And I know SNL had that sketch. These sad comedies that are always trying to make you cry. Yeah. It's like, okay, they got dramas. They got dramas for that. I can watch, if I want to cry, I get dramas, but can you make me laugh today? No? Okay, it's a non-laughing episode. Nope. Oh, yeah. It's okay, gotcha. Okay, thank you. Speaking here, but my next one is
yeah.
No, I was going to say my next one is older and is nothing but really laughs too. Okay. To show that this is my oldest film on it. I think that there are, if you're doing what I'm doing and trying to make an objective list, I think there are a few movies that have to be on it, and we're now in that range. These are like these are the ones I have that I think if I saw a top 10 list and they didn't have it, I would think that the list was bad. Some Like It Hot. Some Like It Hot.
Billy Wilder, man.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're talking about like multiple people just absolutely firing at 100 the whole time. Tony Curtis, Jack Lemmon, Marilyn Monroe. It is
really funny. Marilyn Monroe's so good in that movie.
She's so fun, and we only know her as a historical figure.
Yeah.
And she's these people who become icons, they almost don't feel real. You watch this movie, you're like, oh, this is why she's an icon, because she wasn't just one of the most beautiful people alive. She was incredibly talented. Yeah.
And no one gave her flowers at the time. That was a huge, big problem. And that was, ultimately what led to her tragic end of her life. But she was very talented and worked really hard at trying to be a better actor. And Billy Wilder just got that and made her just gave her really funny lines to say, knew exactly what kind of character to give her. And she's tremendous in that movie, and just the movie's really funny.
Manic energy, just a manic energy from start to finish that drives it, never lets up.
And it's ultimately you're like, oh, it's a gangster caper movie, but it's Tony Curtis and Jack Lemmon are jazz musicians who witness a gangland hit, and so they go into hiding uh, in drag as women in an all women like jazz review or something like that. And so like, and then of course they both kind of fall in love with Marilyn Monroe, who wouldn't. But Tony Curtis basically goes, he like dresses up then as a rich guy at this resort to try to like woo her. It's so funny. And he does a Cary Grant impression the entire time when he's playing that character. Really funny.
I don't.
Man, do I enjoy that movie.
I hope people that haven't seen it go watch it after hearing us talk about it. So I don't want to spoil this, but I will say it has arguably the funniest last line in movie history.
100%.
And before we started this, I went back and watched it just to make sure I still laughed as hard as I could. And even without all of the build, it still just killed me. So Some Like It Hot. I feel like this is another one of those movies where if you haven't seen it, you might be surprised to hear it. And if you have seen it, you'll be like, of course it's on the list.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love Billy Wilder. When I first moved to LA, my roommate and I were broke. And so one of the things we did was that first summer we were like, well, let's watch all the Billy Wilder movies, because like we're like, this is what we're doing. We're going to watch all the Billy Wilder movies.
And you ended up working for Nerdist?
No, that was way before.
No, I'm just saying I'm just saying you ended up working at Nerdist later in life.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah. I thought about it, and yes, that is what I wanted. And we watched them in order, and I think all but a couple of them were available to watch, which was very convenient. But man, was he hitting on also, and just could write. Like he had like one of the best film noir, or two of the best film noirs, was Double Indemnity and Sunset Boulevard. He had I think won his first Oscar for the Lost Weekend, which is a really harrowing look at somebody, an alcoholic going through the DTs. Like it's and Ray Milland like very deservedly won an Oscar for that as well. Just was very versatile, but always had, he had co-writers that he worked with too. I believe this one was IAL Diamond, which was one of his like go-to co-writers. And it was just like boom, 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 boom. If you haven't watched one of his later movies, which is called 1, 2, 3, it is a zany madcap movie that takes place. I think it stars James Cagney as the head of Coca-Cola, the Coca-Cola plant, like near, like in West Berlin or something like that. And like there's all this like over the wall kind of Cold War-y stuff. It's really funny. Highly recommend. That was probably his last funniest movie, was this one called 1, 2, 3. That's why I recommend it. But anyway, wonderful choice. Thank you so much for choosing it. I'm going to choose another one that I think needs to be on the list. This is like, it is a dark comedy, but it is funny. And it is, strangely enough, done by somebody who most people consider humorless. And that is Stanley Kubrick's Dr. Strangelove, or How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love the Bomb, which turns 60 this year. Starring Peter Sellers as 3 different characters, was going to be 4 different characters, but he had hurt his back or something like that and couldn't do one of the things, and so that's why they cast Slim Pickens as
that HBO biopic said
that one that Jeffrey Rush.
Yeah. Which is excellent. Said that he faked the injury because he couldn't figure out how to play that 4th character.
Oh, that's
he was supposed to play. That's the movie. I don't know, but that he was supposed to play the pilot who actually drops the bomb. Mm-hmm. And he bagged out by faking an injury because he couldn't figure out what to do with it.
Yeah. So Peter Sellers plays Dr. Strangelove, who is this like ridiculous, like former Nazi scientist in a wheelchair. Like it's with like a hand that doesn't behave. Like it is such a weird character choice. The actual story could not be more serious, which is about unintended nuclear war, hotting up the Cold War on accident. And people in the war room kind of like figuring out what to do. And like, it's all very nuclear annihilation is nigh kind of thing. And yet it is incredibly funny. George C. Scott, who is one of my very favorite actors, gives such a great performance, basically making fun of his own performance as General Patton, uh, as just like this warmongering dude. And there's a one point when he's like, and it was an accident that they kept in the movie, but like he's walking toward the big board and trips over a chair and does a complete backward somersault and then gets back up and keeps delivering the line. It's so funny. It's so good and funny.
I've read
but
that he did not mean to trip, that he just
Yeah, it was an
fell and
accident.
kept going. And it's,
Yeah.
And it's just, you watch, knowing it makes it funnier. Usually knowing what's going on behind the curtains does not make it better. But in that case, it's just so impressive.
Yeah. It's the whole scene. Peter Sellers, okay, on top of playing Dr. Strangelove, plays the British air captain who kind of is the one who talks to Sterling Hayden's character, who's the insane general who is accidental, or his machinations are the ones that are causing this war, basically, because he thinks that women are stealing his essence because he's impotent. And so he's like, no, we must preserve our essence. But Sellers' third character is the president of the United States, who is the most, hi, everyone, I'm the president. And there's this hilarious conversation, one-way conversation over the phone when he's talking to the Russian prime minister, or the Soviet prime minister, about something has happened with the bomb. Yes, the hydrogen bomb. Well, now don't get mad at me. Like, it's so funny. It's so funny. It's one of my favorite performances, and it's all in one take too, which is another like hallmark. And he, a couple times in it, he almost starts laughing because he's just making up half of it. And it's, man, is it funny. I love that movie so much. I haven't watched it in way too long, but it is one of the comedies that needs to go on the best comedy list.
And I had it on mine before I saw yours. This is also one. This is also one I have that has to be on the list. This is like,
it simply must.
It the top 5. This is there, and I think if I had to rank them, I might even have it 3 or 4 probably. But like, if you say it's the funniest movie of all time, I'd give it to you. The other thing I love about this is that the story is that George C. Scott did not want to be playing the character that dumb, but that Kubrick would ask him to just do one take that way, just like humor him, do the take that way, and then all of those takes were the ones that got into the movie.
Oh yeah, of course.
So it's so funny that one of the funniest performances ever in one of the funniest movies ever, the actor didn't want to give it. He just kind of got tricked into doing it, and just shows the genius of Stanley Kubrick.
He knew the tone. I think one of the things about Kubrick too that we obviously see is that he never let anybody in on what he was doing. Like, he would just like make them keep trying until they got, but he was like terrible with people, like just very bad at giving direction. And so that doesn't surprise me that he was basically just, he wasn't good at conveying what the tone of the movie was going to be. And so just was like, no, do it, make him stupider sounding. And it's just like, why? Just do it for me. And then of course that's the one to use. That might be the first instance of that trick working, which has happened many times. There are other actors I've heard say, like, if they say, can you do it like this, just in this one take, they refuse to do it because it's like, I know that's what you're going to use, and I don't think that's right for the character. I don't know. It's a dialogue. Next up for you, we are down to our last 2, I believe, choices.
Yes, I have 2 left, but you are going to bring up one. You are going to bring up the one that I think deserves to be number 1. So we're looking at my 2. We're looking at that one because we're going to look at my 2 and 3 right now.
Okay, great.
We started talking about This Is Spinal Tap.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think it's the best comedy ever. I just think it might be the 3rd best comedy ever.
This is Spinal Tap, yeah, for sure.
This Is Spinal Tap. It's incredible. It's been on TV lately, maybe because they just started filming This Is Spinal Tap 2.
Mm-hmm.
And while I very much wanted to put like Waiting for Guffman on this list, I figured that this movie is still the funniest of that genre, and it kind of is carrying the load for all of them, which is fine by me. Even if Christopher Guest didn't direct it, it's still a Christopher Guest movie. I don't know what you could say about this movie that I wouldn't agree with in terms of how good it is. I will just say this. At one point in the movie, Christopher Guest is playing his instrument with a violin, and he stops to tune the violin. And I remember the first time I saw that thinking, how does a person even come up with that? Like, how is somebody this funny? And that's just what the movie is. It's just so funny, and everything has is really aged pretty well. It shows that characterization. Just let people uh, be a character who's funny. Let funny people be a character who's funny, and just let them go. And that's what it is. There's a very loose plot, right? Like whatever.
Mhm.
The band's falling apart, and it's kind of it. There's not a scene in this movie I don't love. There's not a performance I don't love, and it gets better with age somehow. Like
Yeah.
I wish I know this was really well received at the moment, but I just feel like the older I get, the more I like it, and I've liked it since day one of seeing it.
Yeah, I agree. I think this is like truly one of the funniest, and like to your point, like it goes very stupid, like cuz that thing, which is making fun of the fact that a lot of rock guitarists back in the 70s would have songs where they would play their guitar with a bow, and playing the guitar with a violin rather than the bow is so dumb. It's very these everyone quotes "This goes to 11," whatever. That's not even like the fifth funniest bit in the movie. But it's the one that gets talked about a lot. I have an interesting kind of like iconoclastic perhaps or controversial thing to say about Christopher Guest movies, because during another lockdown thing, my wife and I watched all of those. She had seen one or two. I'd seen all of them before, but it was nice to kind of revisit them. Waiting for Guffman especially is guilty of this, but I think Christopher Guest punches down a lot, and I think that makes me kind of sour to a lot of those. I think he has more disdain for characters like that who are just kind of small town yokels who think they're good, like uh and that kind of bums me out because like I think it takes away some of the enjoyment. I think Best in Show is my favorite of those movies. I think that one's very, very funny, and I think it punches down the least. But I think Waiting for Guffman actually punches down a lot. It has kind of contempt for simple people, and
I can see what you mean. Yeah, it definitely has sort of that early American Idol vibe where we thought it was okay to just put untalented, naive people on TV and laugh at them.
yeah.
I don't think though. I don't really think I get that impression from like A Mighty Wind, because those are all successful people in certain
Well, yeah, and,
ways.
and that's the same thing with This Is Spinal Tap. It's like they're rock stars, but they suck. Like, and that's the point. Like, they're part of this big kind of audacious world. They're not like upstarts who are trying to make it big. Like, you watch that sequence in This Is Spinal Tap where you see all the different bands they were before they got to Spinal Tap. They've just been kind of trying to like get their way into the
The
like
new
forever.
the new originals. A joke that is one of my favorites ever. There's already a band, the originals, so we had to be the new originals.
I truly love. But yeah. Anyway, I think, and maybe it is just Waiting for Guffman, but like it really felt like it felt mean spirited, and that's I like comedy that punches up rather than punches down. But
And by the way, just because you said that the soundtrack at the beginning, you said the Spinal Tap, the A Mighty Wind soundtrack is one of my
wonderful,
favorite movie
wonderful.
soundtracks ever. If you've never listened to it, go put it on, because there are some songs that didn't really make it into the movie, including a song called "Blood on the Coal," which absolutely rocks. It is a fantastic song, but it's also one of the funniest songs you'll ever hear. And the reason it works so well is because it's so sincere.
Yeah.
Like just like the characters in the movie, it is so sincere. It is so funny. Please, after this podcast, go listen to Blood on the Coal.
All right. I will. Okay. My next one, I copped out. This one is just a straight up cop out because I couldn't decide on one. I put on my actual list any one of a dozen Jackie Chan movies because I think action comedy is really tough to pull off. Also, Jackie Chan is a devout disciple of Buster Keaton. Just that kind of stunt based slapstick comedy. I've been watching a lot of Jackie Chan recently. Criterion put out a collection of some of his earliest work as a director. And some of them don't really work for me. Some of them are less funny, but like there are bits in. Have you ever seen Jackie Chan's Police Story from '85? I think.
Parts of them. I've never seen any like straight through.
So it ends up being very kind of not funny by the end. But there is a part where he is manning the phones at the police station, and he's the only one in the office, and there are phones on desks all over the place, and he's in a rolling chair, and he just will go over and pick one up, and then another one will ring, and he'll roll over, and he's picking up all these different phones. There's no action to it. It's just him by himself picking up, and he like flips pencils and tries to do stuff. It's so impressive and so funny. And it is just a comedy bit. Like it's just silly. And I'm specifically talking more so about, because like Rush Hour is funny-ish, and that it has a lot of his stunts in it, but I don't think that one is as funny. It hasn't stood the test of time because it's so kind of late 90s American kind of sensibilities.
But his performance in it
he is wonderful, and he did direct all the action in it, so I think that really helps a lot of it. But Police Story is really funny. Rumble in the Bronx is actually surprisingly funny. And what was the other one I just watched? Drunken Master and Drunken Master 2. The second one was released here as Legend of Drunken Master. Just incredibly, incredibly funny, where like he has to be drunk in order to do the drunken kung fu style, and he doesn't, like, he just gets fall down drunk, but he's like slapping people across the face. It's so impressive. I think he gets a lot of hail as that's not a phrase, as a action star, but like it is all born out of comedy as well.
Yeah, and that's why this is a great choice. Because who else has ever managed to turn the action scenes into comedy quite like this? Like fight scenes, not just action scenes. I should say fights. Like he's funny while fighting. Like he's doing this world class, martial arts, and then he's also funny while he's doing it. It's incredible.
And all those ones he was making in Hong Kong before he kind of before Rush Hour and all that stuff, and a little bit after, but it was his stunt team, and they would practice, and obviously they were very comfortable with each other, but they would, like, here's the locked off shot, here are the moves we need to do within this shot, and then we'll cut. And they would do that for hours and hours and hours and hours just to make sure it was perfect. And then they would move to the next shot. And that level of meticulousness in order to enact a fight scene that is also really funny and also has like acrobatics to it. Some of the most like, I always like Jackie Chan, but revisiting a lot of these movies and watching some of them I'd never seen has been so edifying these last couple months. Where now I'm like, I think Jackie Chan might be like one of my favorite just performers of all time, because he just exudes funny while being a very earnest kind of character most of the time. He never plays like the same way that Harold Lloyd never played, like, not never, but was most famous for playing like the good guy, the kind of like innocent. Jackie Chan's characters are almost always upstanding people, and that's why it's more funny when he fights, because he's like, his whole thing is, I don't want trouble. Like, what if the baddest ass person in the world never wanted to fight and was actually kind of cowardly about it, but was great? And it's like, that's his character. So it's funny and impressive. You would never see Jackie Chan as like a Bruce Lee type who's just like, oh man, look at that guy. That's the entire opposite of what Jackie Chan is. To the benefit, like Bruce, I mean, obviously Bruce Lee passed away, but like, I don't like any Bruce Lee movie as much as I like Jackie Chan movies.
And by the way, he was hilarious voicing Splinter in the most recent Ninja Turtles
he's
movie.
So good in that. Yeah,
he's the funniest part of them. I love that movie, and he's so funny. He's really the funniest good part, and it's that's just how talented he is. And I think
funny in the bones. We say funny in the bones.
I feel like we don't even fully appreciate him, and won't for way too long. Like decades from now, people will be like, well, was this like the most famous person in the world? It's like, no, we kind of screwed up, maybe. Like we did.
Yeah, we stopped making movies with him. I think America kind of thought he was getting too old, and so they stopped. He's making more interesting movies in Hong Kong, and now he's kind of gone into making big budget movies in mainland China because he's an icon over there. And so, but most of those are kind of have some thread large or small of propaganda to them because mainland China's putting up the money for them. And they just kind of don't make Hong Kong movies anymore the way they used to, because Hong Kong's number one export market was mainland China. Now that they are one and the same, can't do that anymore. So there's a lot of interesting kind of historical and political stuff along with Hong Kong cinema, and just Chinese cinema in general. But it's really fascinating. But anyway, as a result, we now don't have hardly any Jackie Chan movies. Also, he's in his like mid to late 60s, I think, at this point. He might even be early 70s. I haven't looked, but so it's tougher for him to do that stuff. But there was about a 20-year period there from the mid 70s to the mid 90s when he was untouchable, just an absolute perfect comedic juggernaut. And so many of those are just in Chinese and we haven't seen them.
Okay. So my last entry is what I have as the second funniest movie of all time. Your final entry is my number one. So before I get to these last two, I just wanted to, we've mentioned a lot of other comedies. Yeah. I just want to mention these, that I consider them, that I think they deserve at least to be heard from. Not counting ones I've already said. Bridesmaids, Major League, Office Space, Beverly Hills Cop, Billy Madison, Beetlejuice, Friday, 48 Hours, Bottoms, the newest one on my list.
Oh, wow, yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Tootsie, The Blues Brothers, Austin Powers, International Man of Mystery, Clueless, A Fish Called Wanda, Wayne's World, Booksmart, Walk Hard, South Park, Bigger, Longer, Uncut, The Trip, The 40-Year-Old Version, Big, all the Bill and Ted movies, Galaxy Quest, Game Night, and M. Night Shyamalan's The Happening.
One of the funniest movies I've ever seen. Excellent list of other ones, because a lot of those were ones that I was like, should I put that? I love those movies. Really wonderful. Yeah. And all of those would be, we'll put the I don't know if we can actually do that. I'll talk to Allie about this, but put the master list of our choices in the show notes or something somewhere so you can see them.
Tell her I did not repeat any of the ones that we already talked about that aren't formally on the list, but we mentioned. I didn't, like, I have Ghostbusters is there, for example.
Yeah, of course.
The only one I didn't mention, because I specifically wanted to say I wanted to just highlight this. The Nice Guys is one of my favorite movies ever.
Nice Guys is great. Wonderful.
I think it's one of the funniest movies ever, and the fact that there haven't been 17 more of them is an absolute crime against humanity.
I mean, and for that matter, Kiss Kiss Bang Bang is also really funny.
Yeah.
Like, obviously both Shane Black movies. I do think The Nice Guys is funnier, but I also I remember like being so surprised at how funny Kiss Kiss Bang Bang is. Val Kilmer, very, very funny in that movie. Okay, what is your number two before we get to our joint number one?
My number two funniest movie of all time, and I've thought about this a lot. It's got four of the funniest people ever, absolutely all at their peak. Caddyshack. Bill Murray, Chevy Chase, Rodney Dangerfield, and somebody I think is in the discussion for the funniest actor ever, Ted Knight. I mean, I just listed three of the most famous comedians ever, and I think Ted Knight is the funniest person in this movie. I grew up on old television. He was the funniest part of the Mary Tyler Moore Show, one of the best sitcoms ever. Caddyshack is just relentlessly funny from start to finish. It's full of incredible characters. It's full of really funny scenes. It's memorable. It's got a million quotes. I think for its 40th anniversary, I even did like the 40 best quotes, or 35th anniversary. You can find that on the site. Every time I watch Caddyshack, I laugh. I think there's something really interesting with Caddyshack. You can learn a lot about somebody's sense of humor by asking them which one of those four characters they think is the funniest, because they are all so different. Bill Murray as Carl Spackler is big and broad. Chevy Chase is too cool for school. Rodney Dangerfield is just old school comedy. And then Ted Knight is just as like the a-hole, the a-hole character. It's just, I love Caddyshack so much. And it was not a big hit at the time. And this is not technically a National Lampoon's movie, but it sort of is. That's the one I was teasing earlier, being above Animal House. I think it deserves this lofty spot, and also not a movie that you necessarily want to watch around kids because of the language and some nudity.
I've never seen Caddyshack. Please put down your letters and pitchforks, please. I do love Ted Knight, though. Weirdly enough, I just recently kind of learned that Ted Knight was the go-to narrator voice for a lot of like Super Friends like era cartoons. So if you listen to those, it's like the Super Friends go to the Hall of Justice, and it's like that's Ted Baxter. That's very funny. From the Mary Tyler Moore Show. One day I'll watch Caddyshack, or I won't. Those are the two options.
No, I promise our listeners I will now haunt you until you watch Caddyshack.
Okay. Again, I would just like to point out I don't love watching comedies. Anyway, so the number one is a comedy that I do love watching, and this is the one that you said was number one, and I was going to say it was number one too. Like, we didn't talk about this beforehand, we didn't agree upon it, but in only 88 minutes, this movie is able to pack in, I think, 9 million jokes. Like, it's so many jokes. It's a joke a second. It is one of the only movies of this type that I think works across the board. It is, of course, I think it made a star out of one of its main characters, doing movies like this ever more. And also it kind of, it was a specific type of comedy that was really refreshing and, kind of puerile at the time. But like, I think this one really stands the test of time. This one is a spoof of very earnest disaster movies, and specifically a movie called Airport 77 or something like that. This is, of course, Airplane! Exclamation point from 1980. Zucker Brothers and Abrams. So it's the best. It is the best. It is the best comedy. It has the most jokes. It is perhaps the funniest movie. Everything is funny. Everything pays off. It's one of the best things I've ever seen in my life. Ted Stryker has a drinking problem. Of course I do, and Don't Call Me Shirley. What's your vector, Victor? Like, just so many good jokes.
The years ago, and watching it, and I think we were in high school, me and my friends watching this movie, and some people hadn't seen it. The scene with the two kids, the two prim and proper kids drinking coffee, the punchline to that interaction, we had to pause the movie. Nobody could pay attention. They were laughing so hard. And, we could go through this whole thing, right? Like you could go scene by scene, line by line. They're all funny. There's not a dud in the film. It is relentless. And this is why I have it as the number one comedy ever, because there are other movies that are maybe just as funny, but they're not as funny as long. A lot of these movies, sometimes the endings are sincere, or there's like a sincere storyline. Airplane hints at sincerity to set up jokes. Like Ted Stryker reuniting with his long lost love. That's not so we feel anything. It's not heartfelt. It's used so they can get more jokes in. And that's what I want from a if a comedy is going to be the number one comedy ever, it has to be comedy. That's all I want. I want to laugh. I want to keep laughing. At no point do I want to feel sad. I don't care if people get happy endings. The only happy ending is me laughing. And that's what Airplane is. And I kind of don't even really know if there's a good argument against it being number one. And in fact, it's so funny that the overlooked sequel is still really funny. Like, the problem is it's just a little too similar.
I was just about to mention
in terms of like a sequel that's too similar.
Yeah,
it's still funny. That's how good the writing is and how good the whole premise is.
Yeah. The sequel did not have the Zucker Brothers or Jim Abrams attached at all, but it did have two people who would go on to be longtime Simpsons writers, Al Jean and Mike Rice. And one of my favorite bits in any of these type of movies is actually in Airplane 2, the sequel. This is one where they go to space. It's like the first commercial space cruiser or whatever. Ted Stryker walks by a door that says caution vacuum, and he opens it and he's attacked by a vacuum attachment. It's one of the stupidest jokes I've ever seen, but I laughed like an idiot.
I'm almost like overwhelmed trying to think of like my favorite lines, because they're all my favorite lines. It's got
Yeah.
Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. Kareem
Yeah.
Abdul-Jabbar, who is now known as like one of the most thoughtful professional athletes we've ever had. He's a brilliant guy, right? But he
Yeah.
was known during his playing career, and this is before my time, but I'm a big sports fan. He was really known as being like kind of a surly guy, right?
Yeah.
Not super friendly. This movie has Kareem Abdul-Jabbar absolutely killing it.
Yeah.
Killing it when the kid's like, my dad says you don't play defense, and he just grabs him, talks about dragging someone's ass up and down the court. How are you turning Kareem Abdul-Jabbar into a comedic genius? That's how good this movie is.
Yeah. It's I think I won't even say unsung hero, but the hero of this movie is Steven Stucker as Johnny, who is just there to make stupid jokes. Like, he just says the silliest things all the time. Well, Lloyd Bridges is there being as straight as possible, and Robert Stack also there being like as straight man as possible. Really, the whole point of this is that they got actors who were known for being incredibly serious. So you got your Lloyd Bridges, who after this would be in a lot more Zucker Brothers movies. You got Robert Stack. You have Peter Graves as the pilot, Captain Clarence Over, which is only his name for a joke, and then
Which
Leslie
totally
Nielsen
pays off.
Yeah, Leslie Nielsen is Dr. Rumack, who was only ever in like dramas and stuff. Like, this is the movie that made especially Lloyd Bridges and Leslie Nielsen like able to be in other kind of very broad comedies. But Steven Stucker is the weird bald guy who's there in the background who just says stuff. There's a sale at Penny's, like stuff like that, which is so stupid. And I think most of that stuff, he was just a guy that they knew. And I think he was either in Second City or something like that. But anyway, most of that stuff is just improv, and be like, Johnny, what do you make of this? And he's like, oh, this, I could make a hat, or I make a brooch, or I could make a pterodactyl. And it's so stupid.
I'm so glad you brought that up, because I think that exchange best exemplifies why this movie deserves to be number one, because it's just like so funny in a pure way, where it's just such a non sequitur, and he is so funny in that role consistently. I think that's my favorite line maybe from the film. And it doesn't matter how old you are, you understand why it's funny. It's just naturally funny. It's basic instinct, and it's stupid. It's stupid and smart at the same time, because it's such a great. And I mentioned 30 Rock. Like, this is that type of humor where we are just packing as many jokes in as we can. It's relentlessly funny.
Relentless is a great word for it, because it is almost too many jokes. Like, it's so full of jokes that you actually need that kind of like flashback sequence when like Robert Hayes and oh gosh, what's her name? Julie Haggerty are in like, when they first meet and they're in like the jungle or whatever. There's not as many jokes in that, and you need that in order to catch your breath, because the rest of the movie is just dumb jokes all across the board. I want to watch it right now. Like,
all right, let's do it. Good podcast.
Yeah, let's go. Please let us know your favorite comedies, if there's any we left out. Mike, you tried very hard not to leave anything out. Please.
I'm gonna be adding to my list just for my own sake. Just forgot that. Better go add it to this list. No one's ever gonna look at it but me.
What I think is really interesting is that, obviously, like we said at the beginning, comedy is so subjective. You might not think half of the stuff we said are even that funny. And that's the whole that's the fun of it. But yeah, let us know. Send us your lists to laserfocus@nerdist.com. You can also, I think, that's what we should do, and we will do. We will make a list of our. I will compile all of this into a list on my Letterboxd. You're not on Letterboxd, is that right, Mikey? You should.
No, I decided like 17 social media sites was enough without.
I cut back on most of mine, and so Letterboxd.
Yeah, you're much smarter than I. This is obvious.
But I will compile all of these movies, even the honorable mentions, in a list on my Letterboxd, which you can follow at Kyle_Anderson. And then you can leave me a comment there, and I will share it with Mikey, of course. Mikey, plug stuff that you want to plug.
I still will see if you tweet at me on Twitter, but I usually mostly use Blue Sky. Burger Mike at both, all one word, Burger Mike. But more importantly, you can find me at the greatest website anybody ever created, Nerdist.com.
And yeah, like I said, I guess if you want to see photos of cats, please follow me on Instagram at functional_nerd. Also, as this goes out, the new season, or the first season of X-Men 97 will have dropped its first 2 episodes. I got to see the first 3 episodes, and they're really, really good, everybody. And so we will talk about that after the season is over. Eric will be back, of course, to talk about the X-Men, because we can't stop talking about the X-Men. But yeah, thank you very much, Mikey, for joining me as always, and always give me a fun time to talk about stuff.
Thanks for having me. I hope it was a real ball of laughs.
I hope it was.
Laughs only come in balls for some reason. They never a square of laugh.
A square of laugh,
right? Octagon of laughs.
Yeah, but a ball is 3-dimensional. Those things you mentioned are 2-dimensional.
I mean, a square,
like
a cube of laughs.
Cube of laughs. Cube. Nobody says
a vase of laughs.
A box of laughs. All right, who cares? Thanks for listening to Laser Focus. I've been Kyle Anderson. Join me again next week when my guest will be a different person. Bye-bye. Laser Focus is a production of Nerdist Industries and Legendary Digital Networks. It was produced, edited, and hosted by me, Kyle Anderson. For more, visit Nerdist.com.